What happens when one careless, whispered comment destroys a marriage in an instant? I didn't expect him to hear me, and I never imagined that silence could be sharper than any fight. By the next morning, the papers were on the counter, and my life had changed forever. I'm Ava Hartley, 30 years old, and I used to think a little teasing never hurt anyone. Derek, my husband, had always been patient and steady, the kind of man everyone said I was lucky to have. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But sometimes I craved a thrill, a spark that our calm life couldn't provide. I told myself a little joke, a whispered comment, couldn't matter. It was a quiet evening at home. The kids were at their grandparents', and the apartment was empty and still. I leaned close to Derek, smiling, testing boundaries, and whispered something I had no right to say. Your friend could satisfy me better. I expected a laugh, a playful jab back. I never expected the weight of silence, the way his eyes would lock on mine without a word, the way he would simply stand and leave the room. That night, I lay awake on my side of the bed, expecting him to return, expecting words, a fight, anything. But nothing came. The apartment felt impossibly quiet, the space between us stretching into something I didn't understand. I thought I could charm my way back into his good graces, that humor could erase my carelessness, but the stillness whispered that consequences were already taking shape. By morning, the papers were on the counter, and my life had shifted irreversibly. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The evening started like any other, or so I tried to tell myself. The kids were at their grandparents' house for the weekend, the apartment quiet and empty, giving me the illusion of freedom. Derek had stayed late at the office, something he did often, and I had imagined his absence as a safety net, a permission to test the edges of my own playfulness. Clara had called earlier in the day, warning me to be careful, to keep my teasing harmless. I laughed, telling her I knew what I was doing. But a small, thrilling part of me wanted more than harmless. I wanted to see a reaction, to feel the risk, to flirt with danger just a little before life returned to normal. I moved around the apartment, pouring a glass of wine, letting the music hum softly in the background. I imagined what it would feel like to speak freely, to test boundaries, to say what I thought without consequence. I scrolled through my phone, checking messages. One from Caleb popped up. Hope your evening is going well. I smirked, feeling a rush I couldn't quite explain, and typed back something playful, careful, but provocative. I told myself it was harmless, that Derek would never see it, that it was just for fun. When Derek arrived, the apartment smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser, warm and domestic. He smiled, asked about my day, set down his bag. I felt that familiar pull of affection, the soft spot I always reserved for him, but I didn't lean into it. I wanted to feel a little daring, a little reckless, the thrill of saying something forbidden. That's when it happened. The words escaped me almost without thought, whispered in a tone I thought casual. Your friend could satisfy me better. The apartment froze. I expected a laugh, a playful glare, maybe even a raised eyebrow. But he didn't respond. His expression was calm, unreadable, almost terrifying in its quiet. My stomach flipped, panic and excitement mixing into something sharp and dizzying. I laughed nervously, attempting to reclaim the moment. I'm just joking, I said, forcing a grin. It's only a joke, I whispered to myself, trying to convince myself I had control. He didn't laugh. He didn't scowl. He didn't blink rapidly. He simply stood there, as if weighing the implications of every word I had ever spoken. Then, without a word, he walked out of the room. My jaw dropped. I stared at the doorway, expecting him to return, expecting words, confrontation, anything. But the apartment remained silent, thick with unspoken judgment. I tried to convince myself it was overreaction, that he would come back in a minute, that the tension was temporary. But hours passed, and he didn't return. I wandered through the apartment, trying to distract myself. I turned on music, poured another glass of wine, told myself it was playful, harmless, even necessary. My parents had always said a little teasing keeps relationships alive. Clara had said the same. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more oppressive the silence became. I realized then that my playful words had a weight I hadn't accounted for, and the calmness of his response, more than anger ever could, made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in his presence. I called Clara, my voice pitched too high, trying to sound casual. "He'll be fine," I said, forcing laughter. But Clara's tone told me she didn't believe me. "Ava, he's serious. You went too far this time. Be careful," she warned. I assured her I knew what I was doing, hiding the pit forming in my stomach. Later that night, I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. I whispered to myself that I could still fix this, that charm and explanation could erase my misstep. I thought of all the ways I could redirect the situation, how I could spin it, make it seem harmless, playful. But the apartment's quiet pressed down, heavier than ever. Derek wasn't angry. He was assessing, calculating, waiting. The playful boundary I had crossed was no longer mine to control. By the time I finally fell asleep, the weight of my words had settled into every corner of the apartment. The whispered comment that had seemed so small, so insignificant, now loomed over everything I had built, everything I thought I could manipulate. The night that I had believed I could control had begun to control me, quietly, deliberately, irrevocably. And I had no idea just how far Derek would go to respond, or how final his actions would become. The next morning, the apartment felt heavier, suffused with a tension I couldn't name. Derek had left early for work, as usual, and the quiet left me feeling exposed, like I was being watched. The whispered comment from the night before kept replaying in my mind, and with every memory, the thrill I had felt the previous evening twisted into a knot of panic. I moved around the kitchen carefully, making coffee and preparing breakfast for the kids, forcing myself to appear calm and unaffected. Every movement felt scrutinized, even though he was gone. I told myself it was paranoia, that he was just busy, but the pit in my stomach refused to let me believe it. At work, I tried to immerse myself in my projects, emails, and client meetings, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the whispered words and Derek's calm, unreadable expression. Clara called mid-morning. "How's he doing?" she asked cautiously. I laughed, trying to make my voice sound light. "He's fine, just busy with work." But I felt her hesitation over the phone, the concern that she couldn't fully voice, and I realized even my closest friend sensed something shifting between us. I tried to rationalize it. He was probably just thinking, just reflecting, but the dread in my chest told me otherwise. By lunchtime, I had convinced myself that Derek needed space, that the silence wasn't a punishment, but a temporary pause. I texted him playfully, hoping to break the tension. "Hey, want to grab a coffee after work?" Nothing. Hours passed with no reply. My attempts to charm, to redirect, to spin the situation were failing. The apartment had begun to feel like a trap, every corner reminding me that I had crossed a line I didn't fully understand until now. When I returned home that evening, Derek was already there. He moved through the apartment quietly, preparing dinner while the kids played. He didn't greet me immediately, didn't ask about my day. I tried to speak casually, mentioning small incidents at work, hoping to distract him. He nodded once, still silent, still deliberate. I felt a rush of panic. His calm, precise movements made me hyper-aware of every gesture, every word. As dinner progressed, I attempted to create normalcy, chatting with the kids, laughing at small jokes, moving through the motions. But Derek's eyes occasionally flicked toward me, calm and assessing, like he was weighing every word I had spoken. I tried to meet his gaze with my own playful teasing, attempting to reclaim the power I thought I had, but it felt hollow. His silence was heavier than any argument, and for the first time, I realized that charm, humor, and manipulation were useless against someone so quiet and deliberate. After the kids went to bed, Derek sat across from me on the couch, a neutral expression on his face. I tried to force a smile, attempted casual conversation, hoping to reclaim some control. "It was just a joke," I said softly, laughing nervously. He didn't respond immediately, only letting his gaze linger. "Is it really a joke if it destroys trust?" he asked quietly. The calmness in his voice cut deeper than any anger. I laughed again, but it faltered, because I could feel the truth of it pressing down on me. I tried to rationalize the situation, whispering excuses to myself. I told myself it was a misstep, a playful comment taken too seriously, that I had no real intention of harm. But the weight of his calm presence made every excuse sound empty. I realized then that the apartment, once a place of comfort and control, had become a space where every word and gesture was observed, evaluated, and catalogued. The following day, Derek maintained his distance, leaving early, returning late, spending more time in his office. I sent playful messages again, hoping to elicit some response, anything to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Nothing. The absence of his reaction stung far more than confrontation ever could. I began to understand that his silence was deliberate, a strategy I could not outwit. By midweek, I noticed subtle changes in the apartment, small details aligned perfectly, his belongings arranged precisely, his movements measured. Every glance I cast in his direction carried the weight of scrutiny. I realized that the whispered comment I had dismissed as harmless had begun a ripple effect I could neither anticipate nor control. My attempts at humor, charm, or justification felt weak, ineffective. The man I thought I could manipulate had already begun a quiet, deliberate campaign of observation and preparation, and I had no idea just how far he would take it. The night I had thought playful had already started dictating the rhythm of our lives. His calm precision, his deliberate silence, and the subtle shifts in his behavior made it clear. The reckoning had begun, and I was powerless to stop it. Every day that passed, every glance, every measured step he took, reminded me that consequences were already unfolding in ways I had neither seen nor imagined. By midweek, the tension in the apartment had become almost unbearable. Derek's quiet presence was everywhere, deliberate, methodical, and impossible to ignore. He didn't yell, he didn't scold, he didn't even glare. He simply existed, moving through the rooms with the same calm precision he had always had. But now it carried a weight I couldn't shake. Every glance I cast, every word I spoke, every gesture felt magnified, scrutinized, measured. The whispered comment I had thought playful now hung over the house like a shadow, and I realized that the thrill I had sought the week before had already begun to spiral into consequences I couldn't control. Clara insisted we go to a small dinner with friends Friday night. I hesitated, feeling the weight of Derek's silence pressing down on me, but the thought of another evening alone with the tension in the apartment was suffocating. I wanted distraction, attention, a reminder that I could still charm, manipulate, and control a situation, at least outside the home. I put on a dress that made me feel bold and visible, telling myself it was confidence, that I could handle anything. I told myself I needed to reclaim a sense of normalcy. At the dinner, the atmosphere was light and friendly. Friends greeted me warmly, laughing and joking as usual. Someone asked if Derek had given me permission to go out, and I smiled, claiming he was supportive and trusting. I laughed with them, enjoying the attention and feeling clever for maintaining my social dominance. Clara leaned close, whispering, "Be careful. He's watching, even when he's not here." I waved her concern away, confident that the night's events were behind me, that Derek's silence didn't mean anything. During the evening, conversation inevitably turned to relationships. I couldn't resist. I made a playful joke at Derek's expense, teasing that he was predictable, careful, boring, a man who couldn't keep up with me or anyone else. The friends laughed, and I laughed with them, feeling the rush of attention and the illusion of control. My parents laughed along, nodding encouragement, while Derek's mother observed quietly, her gaze sharp and unyielding. That look unsettled me far more than any argument would have. Later, someone mentioned Caleb, and without thinking, I whispered the same thought I had said at home. He could probably handle me better than Derek. The laughter that followed was immediate, but it felt hollow. I caught a fleeting glance toward the door, expecting Derek to appear at any moment, and my heart raced. For the first time, the joke I had thought harmless felt dangerous, like a match held too close to dry kindling. After dinner, Clara and I stepped outside to get some air. She didn't hide her concern. "You're pushing it too far. He's not ignoring this. You can't keep testing boundaries like this." I smiled, insisting I knew what I was doing, but inside, panic had started to settle. The whispered words, the laughter, the teasing, they were no longer playful. They had already shifted the balance of power, and I could feel it tightening around me. Returning home, the apartment was quiet, heavier than usual. Derek was in the kitchen, calmly preparing a late-night snack. I tried to speak casually, mentioning the evening, the friends, the conversations, pretending the whisper and the tension didn't exist. He nodded once, then returned to what he was doing, his silence deliberate and complete. I felt a prickle of fear. His calmness, more intimidating than anger, made it impossible for me to predict or manipulate what would happen next. Later, after the kids went to bed, Derek asked me to sit with him in the living room. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse quicken. I forced a smile and tried to speak first, attempting casual conversation, hoping to soften the moment. "It was just a joke," I said nervously, laughing lightly. He didn't respond at once, only letting his gaze rest on me. "Is it really a joke if it erodes trust?" he asked quietly, deliberately. I tried to laugh again, but the sound faltered in my throat. I attempted to rationalize, whispering excuses to myself. It was playful, harmless, not meant to hurt anyone. Yet the apartment felt oppressive. Every shadow, every object, every corner, now a reminder that my words had power, and Derek's calm authority had shifted the dynamics irreversibly. I realized that every manipulation I had ever relied on, every excuse or spin, was powerless against someone so deliberate and composed. The following day, Derek's routine remained unchanged, but more deliberate. Leaving early, returning late, spending long hours in his office. I tried again with playful messages, innocuous texts, and casual social posts, hoping to reclaim attention, to assert control. Nothing. He didn't respond. The absence of reaction stung far more than confrontation ever could. I was learning, painfully, that his silence was a weapon, a form of observation and preparation I could not evade or outwit. By midweek, I noticed small changes throughout the apartment. Everything had been adjusted, keys neatly aligned, papers perfectly stacked, small details attended to with precision. I realized then that the whispered comment I had assumed was inconsequential had started a chain reaction. The calm, deliberate, methodical man I thought I could charm, manipulate, or redirect had already begun a quiet, relentless campaign. The night I had treated as harmless was now dictating the rhythm of our lives, and I had no idea how far Derek had already gone to reclaim control. By the start of the following week, the apartment felt heavier, almost suffocating. Derek moved through the rooms with quiet precision, performing routine tasks with an attention to detail that now felt calculated. He didn't yell, he didn't glare, he didn't even speak more than necessary. Yet every glance, every small gesture, every deliberate step he took seemed designed to make me hyper-aware of myself. The whispered comment I had thought playful now hung over everything like a shadow I could not escape. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, that he was just busy with work, that the silence was temporary. But the tension pressed down in every corner, and I realized I had begun a chain of events I couldn't control. Clara called again mid-morning, sensing my unease. She urged me to be careful, to think before speaking, to remember that Derek was not a man who responded impulsively. I laughed nervously, assuring her I knew what I was doing, but even as I said it, my hands shook. Every text, every glance, every interaction now felt loaded. The playful teasing I had relied on for so long to manipulate or charm him had lost its power. Even his absence during the day felt intentional, a measured withdrawal designed to make me anxious. When I returned home that evening, Derek was in the kitchen, calmly preparing dinner while the kids played in the living room. He didn't greet me immediately, didn't ask how my day went, didn't comment on the evening. I tried to engage casually, mentioning work and small incidents from my day. He nodded, listened briefly, then returned to what he was doing. I felt the tightening knot in my chest, the panic rising in my stomach. His silence was deliberate, a demonstration of control, and I realized that charm, humor, and manipulation were no longer tools I could rely on. Dinner passed in a haze. I moved through the motions, serving food, laughing at the kids' jokes, pretending everything was normal. But every glance from him carried weight. Every slight pause in his movements felt like judgment. I tried to joke, to tease lightly, to reclaim some sense of power, but it fell flat. The calm, deliberate way he observed me made me feel exposed, like a subject under a microscope. I could no longer hide behind playful innocence. Every word, every gesture, every thought was vulnerable to scrutiny. After the kids went to bed, Derek motioned for me to join him in the living room. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse quicken. I forced a smile, attempting casual conversation, but the apartment was thick with tension. "It was just a joke," I said softly, trying to laugh, hoping the sound would diffuse the atmosphere. He didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at me, calm and deliberate, letting the silence stretch between us. Then he said quietly, "Is it really a joke if it erodes trust?" My laughter faltered. I realized that what I had intended as playful had become a fracture in the foundation of our relationship. I tried to rationalize, whispering excuses to myself. It was harmless, playful, just a tease. I didn't mean any harm. But his gaze and the quiet in the apartment pressed in, relentless. The objects around me, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, all seemed to reflect the gravity of what I had done. I understood then that every manipulation, every excuse, every attempt to spin the situation was powerless against someone so precise, so controlled, so deliberate. The next day, Derek maintained his routine with even more deliberate care, leaving early, returning late, spending long hours in his office. I attempted playful texts again, innocuous social posts, messages designed to charm or draw attention. Nothing. He did not respond. The absence of any reaction hurt more than confrontation ever could have. I realized his silence was not ignorance. It was observation, calculation, and preparation. By midweek, I noticed small changes throughout the apartment that I hadn't seen before. Keys and personal items were aligned neatly, papers stacked with meticulous precision, small objects repositioned with care. Everything seemed orchestrated, deliberate, and it made me hyper-aware of every movement, every word. The whispered comment I had thought trivial had begun a ripple effect that reshaped our lives. The calm, methodical, controlled man I had thought I could manipulate had already started a quiet, unstoppable campaign to reclaim control. The night I had assumed was playful was no longer mine. The apartment, the silence, the small calculated actions around me had taken command. I had no way to predict, manipulate, or charm my way out. Every gesture, every glance, every word now carried consequence. The reckoning had begun, and I could feel it tightening like a grip I could not escape. The life I had once thought I could navigate with humor and charm was shifting beneath me, and I realized I had no idea how far Derek would go to restore what I had broken. It happened early one morning, quiet and deliberate. The kids were at their grandparents', the apartment empty and still, giving no warning of what was coming. Derek walked in carrying a manila envelope, placing it neatly on the kitchen table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He didn't say a word that suggested anger. He simply said calmly, "We need to go through this." My stomach dropped, but I tried to maintain composure. "What is it?" I asked, forcing curiosity into my voice. He opened the envelope with careful precision and laid out its contents. Printed messages, documenting the whispered comment I had made about Caleb, texts to friends laughing about it, and notes on how my parents and his parents had reacted. Every word, every tiny gesture, every teasing remark I had thought playful and harmless stared back at me, undeniable and meticulously recorded. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. I wanted to laugh, to deflect, to charm my way out. But Derek didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't give me any cue to do anything but confront the weight of my own recklessness. "I'm not here to yell," he said quietly, his voice even, controlled. "I just need you to understand what this means." I tried to argue, tried to claim it was just a joke, that it had no real significance. He didn't respond immediately. He simply pointed to the pages, the timestamps, the consistent evidence. Every playful whisper, every teasing laugh, every attempt to manipulate or justify myself was cataloged in clear, factual detail. My chest tightened. Then he handed me another envelope. My pulse spiked. Inside were documents drafted by his lawyer, formal custody arrangements for the kids, reassignment of our joint accounts, and legal measures securing our assets. "I've taken steps to protect what matters," he said softly. "I want this done fairly, legally, without drama, but I cannot ignore what has happened." My hands went cold. I wanted to deny, to charm, to plead with him to stop, but I realized in that moment that I had no control. He had anticipated everything. I tried one last form of manipulation, insisting it was just a joke, that I hadn't meant harm, that the words were playful. His gaze remained calm, deliberate, unshakable. "You've had plenty of time to manipulate the narrative," he said quietly. "Now the facts speak louder than excuses." His calm authority cut deeper than any yelling could have. He continued, explaining each aspect of the legal documents. Custody arrangements ensured the children's stability, asset protections reassigned control of financial accounts, and separation measures were finalized to protect both parties. "This isn't punishment," he said. "It's consequence, and it's necessary because of the choices you made." I wanted to cry, to beg, to make him see I could fix it. But he remained calm, methodical, untouchable. I looked down at the evidence, at my own words and actions laid bare. Even my parents, who had once defended me, could no longer counter the clarity of the documentation. Every excuse, every charm, every attempt to gaslight was powerless against the deliberate precision of Derek's methodical actions. I realized that he had acted without confrontation, without drama, and yet completely dismantled the control I had believed I maintained. Finally, he stood and said, "I'm done explaining. Everything you need is here. The rest will be handled through proper channels." He left the kitchen, leaving me sitting at the table, the folders spread before me, the reality of my choices pressing down in every direction. I was powerless, exposed, and forced to face the consequences of a moment I had dismissed as playful, innocent, trivial. For the first time, I understood that consequences do not need anger, shouting, or confrontation to be devastating. Derek's silence, his methodical preparation, and his reliance on lawful authority were more effective than any outburst could have been. The whispered words, the playful teasing, the reckless comment had set a chain of events into motion that I could neither charm nor spin my way out of. The reckoning had arrived, and it was precise, deliberate, and irreversible. I sat in the apartment long into the evening, staring at the folders, the printed messages, the legal documents, and the note Derek had left atop them. You wanted to test boundaries. I ensured the consequences are permanent. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages from friends and family, and I ignored them all. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. Derek had acted with a calm, precise authority that left no room for charm, no space for excuses. The night I had treated as playful had already taken control of everything I had believed I could manipulate, and there was nothing left I could do to undo it. The morning after Derek delivered the legal documents, the apartment felt emptier than ever. The children were already with their grandparents, leaving the space quiet and still. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope, the papers spread before me like a map of my own downfall. Custody arrangements, asset protection, and separation measures were all finalized, drafted and signed by his lawyer. I wanted to crumple the papers, throw them away, somehow erase what had been set into motion, but I couldn't. The reality was undeniable. My careless words had triggered consequences I could no longer avoid. I wandered through the apartment, trying to convince myself that it was just a temporary setback, that charm and explanation could still turn the tide. But every corner, every object, seemed to mock me. Coffee mugs, books, even the arrangement of the furniture felt like markers of a life I had once controlled and now could not. Derek's quiet, deliberate actions had left no room for manipulation, no cracks in which I could hide. I tried to recall how it had all begun, a whispered joke, a fleeting comment. But even that memory now carried weight, a significance I had never anticipated. By mid-morning, I received a text from Clara. "Are you okay?" I hesitated before replying, trying to craft a message that sounded casual, light-hearted, pretending that the situation was less severe than it felt. I typed, deleted, and finally sent something vague. "I'll be fine." Even that message felt hollow. I knew she sensed the gravity of the situation, even if she couldn't say it outright. Throughout the day, I reflected on how far Derek had gone without confrontation, without anger, without spectacle. He had observed, documented, and planned with meticulous care. He hadn't yelled, hadn't humiliated me in front of friends or family. He had acted quietly, legally, and effectively, and now every small detail I once relied on for leverage, my charm, my humor, my ability to twist situations, was meaningless. When the children returned from their grandparents' house that evening, Derek's routine with them was calm and precise. He guided them through homework, answered questions with patience, and maintained a presence that was both strong and measured. Their laughter, their smiles, and their obedience were reminders that the life I had taken for granted remained intact under his control, even as I struggled to grasp the extent of my own isolation. I attempted to reclaim some sense of normalcy by engaging the children, playing with them, and pretending that nothing had changed. But every glance at Derek, calm and composed across the room, reminded me that I had lost the upper hand. I tried to whisper excuses to myself, telling myself that this was temporary, that he might forgive, that my charm could still influence the outcome. But the precision of his actions left no room for hope, no space for manipulation. Later, after the kids went to bed, I sat alone on the couch, the envelope still in front of me. I reread the note Derek had left. "You wanted to test boundaries. I ensured the consequences are permanent." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, methodical, and absolute. My whispered comment, my playful teasing, my reckless attempt at humor, all of it had been catalogued, assessed, and addressed with legal authority. I tried to imagine what it would be like to confront him, to argue, to charm, but the thought felt futile. Derek had acted in a way that ensured control without confrontation, dignity without spectacle. Every move, every document, every calculated step had shifted power entirely out of my hands. The night I had thought playful had become a pivot point, and I was powerless to alter its outcome. The following day, movers arrived at the apartment to enforce the separation of property and possessions. I watched as familiar items were packed, organized, and removed. Derek's calm, methodical approach left no room for chaos, no opportunity for charm or pleading. I felt helpless, exposed, and acutely aware of the finality of the situation. Every step of the process reinforced the reality that the life I had once believed I controlled was now governed entirely by his deliberate, lawful actions. I sat at the now empty kitchen table long into the night, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock the only sounds. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from friends and family, but I ignored them all. I knew that no one could change what had been done. Derek's silence, patience, and methodical enforcement of consequences had dismantled every defense I had relied on, leaving me to confront the reality of my choices alone. Finally, I understood fully that consequences do not require anger, shouting, or confrontation to be devastating. Silence, precision, and lawful authority can be sharper than any raised voice. Derek had exercised all three with absolute mastery. The whispered words, the playful teasing, the reckless comment, every small choice I had made, had triggered a chain of events that could not be reversed. I was left powerless, humiliated, and acutely aware that the night I had treated as a joke had changed everything forever. The apartment was quiet, the folders and legal papers gone, the movers finished, the children asleep in their new routine. I sat alone, staring at the remnants of my own recklessness, knowing that Derek had acted without spectacle, but with absolute effectiveness. The life I had taken for granted, the control I had believed I possessed, was gone, and there was nothing left I could do to reclaim it. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching,